Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflicts Peace Education Working Group webinar series on good practice guidance implementing education for peace, conflict resolution, and social emotional learning in scale in education systems. And so my name is Jen Batton. I'm the co-chair of the GPPAC Peace Education Working Group with Dr. Margaret Sinclair. Let me hand it over to Margaret to introduce herself.
Okay, I'm interested in this this area because I used to work for UNHCR and worked with refugees. And refugees, they so want peace, so they can go home. In those days, when I was doing that work, there was a lot of discussion of fragility and conflict-sensitive education. So one of the things we did in collaboration with UNESCO and my organization was to look at conflict sensitive education for planners, basically equitable access for different groups in society to education, and conflict sensitive curriculum. But we gave it different names, and you've seen the name on this slide. Actually, it's not on the slide. Safety, resilience, and social cohesion. You can call it learning to live together, anything. So since I did that, I've been passionate about this topic. And so I'm here today. I really appreciate Jen arranging this, and I really appreciate Loreta Castro, who is an icon in this field, for her contribution.
Thank you so much, Margaret. So Margaret had mentioned the title of the series.
Oh, yes, it's there.
Education for Safety, Resilience, and Social Cohesion. You can access these booklets that we will be covering today online, and we'll send everyone who registered a link to the documents so that you can access them in several different languages. The first session is what is education for peace, conflict resolution, and social emotional learning, and how do we get started? And as Margaret mentioned, this is based on a scoping study and work that was done through UNESCO a couple of years ago. You can access it. So this series will include what is it and how do we get started, which we'll cover today. Then we'll have curriculum approaches and textbook renewal in October, and we'll be posting those dates on the GPPAC website and also email anyone who registered for the first in the series. And then teacher development, and followed by assessment. We'll be looking at the good practices, the global good practices, and some tips for you. Each session, we're going to have at least one special guest who are icons in their respective regions or countries of the world who've been doing this work. And we want to especially thank and dedicate the series to Dr. Loreta Castro, who for over 50 years has been an educator. And she is the founding director of the Center for Peace Education in Miriam College, Philippines. We're going to hear a good review of some of the work that's been happening there in the Philippines, as well as about some of the policies and some of the challenges with bringing that into practice in countries and regions. So let's first start with what are we talking about? What do we mean by conflict resolution education, social emotional learning, and peace education? So conflict resolution education models and teaches in culturally meaningful ways processes that help both individuals work interpersonal conflict and institutional conflicts and create safe and welcoming communities. So we're really looking for skills, knowledge, and ability. So how do we put those knowledge and skills together to apply that in our communities of practice, whether it be the classroom or in our communities as a whole or in our countries? So when we're looking at the skills, and we're going to have an opportunity to take a look too at social emotional learning, the conflict resolution skills generally are taught and they build upon each other. So just like math, we add and subtract before we learn to multiply and divide. And in this case, we have a series where we look at understanding the nature of conflict first, and you'll see some of the core skills under that and concepts. Then emotions in conflict and effective communication skills, and then finally problem solving. After that then is when we teach some of the formal models of conflict resolution like mediation or restorative justice practices. So now let's take a look at a clip from Dr. Loreta Castro as she shares her definition of peace education and how they use that there in the Philippines. So how do you, because when we look at peace education around the world, it's defined differently in some countries. So it would be wonderful if you could share with us a little bit about how you there in the Philippines particularly your center to find peace and how that's impacted the work that you do in education.
Yes. Well, for our college, we define peace as not only the absence of war and direct violence, but also the presence of just relationships among humans and between humans and Mother Earth. This is a definition that, of course, is, I think, also adhered to by other institutions. In our case, of course, being a Christ-inspired institution, we also say, in addition to this, that we also think of educating for peace as very much connected with the gospel nonviolence, okay, and also that we think of it as in shalom, which is fullness and wholeness. Okay, and then for peace education, this is something that we borrowed from UNESCO. Well, UNESCO is a very good definition of a culture of peace, and we thought it is very comprehensive enough. And so we think of peace education as education that promotes a culture of peace, which consists of beliefs, values, and behaviors that respect human dignity, that rejects violence in all its forms, prevents violent conflicts by tackling the root causes, and of course also the importance of other peace values such as cooperation and dialogue.
Great. So how do you So in addition to that, we'd like to take a look at what is social emotional learning, the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And I'm going to hand it over to Margaret Sinclair to share with us a little bit more about SEL.
Thanks so much. Well, over the years, we've called this sort of thing so many different names. And nowadays, very fashionable is to call it social and emotional learning, even though it's very much the same as life skills, peace education, etc. in the past. And it does connect nicely with child development, and it is probably therefore quite acceptable within education ministries and the education community. So this particular slide shows a very widely used set of definitions for social and emotional learning from this collaborative in America. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. But there are like many, many versions of this, and I'll just read you from Harvard. They've been looking at lots of programs, and they came up with a list: cognitive, social, emotional, values, perspectives, and identity. And they're calling that social and emotional learning. So definitely, even with this Castro definition on the screen, we're implying that the values are infused into all these things. And when you infuse the values into them, so that you're learning these skills to do something good and not to sell some goods which are inferior, for example, you have the values, and so it's very close to what was in some context would be called peace education. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. So where do countries start? And so one of the tips for starting is to review the objectives of the national curriculum to determine whether and how they address social emotional learning, peace education, or conflict resolution education already. Some of the examples that you'll see in the guidebook in detail are included. And then in addition to that, let's, for instance, in Colombia, one of our special guests that will be coming up in later segments will be from Colombia. And students there in Colombia, students develop the skills and values for living together as individuals and in the wider society, including respect for diversity, conflict resolution, and responsible citizenship. So in Colombia, the focus is around what's called democracy education, civics, and citizenship education, and is linked. In addition, in Kyrgyzstan, the curriculum was reviewed for looking at it through a gender lens. And in the United States, students can demonstrate that they know how to prevent and address bullying and harassment due to gender, language, ethnic, or cultural groups or other characteristics. Most of the 50 states, if not all, already have legislation that you can access around bullying prevention from the Education Commission of the states. And then looking at curriculum outcomes. So what do we want to achieve that goes beyond knowledge to include skills, values, and attitudes? So as we take a look at that, many times folks have focused on skills and the values and attitudes have come first, and then looking at how to apply those in practice. Margaret, would you like to share anything along those lines?
Just to say that it has to be very contextualized. So although we're giving some generic frameworks, each country, each situation, the learning outcomes have to be contextualized. The content has to be contextualized by nationals.
Thank you. So one of the examples that we're going to share regarding curriculum outcomes will be from Dr. Loreta Castro from Miriam College, for those who have joined us a little bit later. And she'll share what some of the work is that they're doing in the Philippines and how they've linked peace education.
So we say that we seek to learn and unlearn. And when we say we seek to learn, it is really to cultivate awareness, concern, and behaviors that lead to peaceful relationships, conditions, and structures. But at the same time that we want to learn this, we also realize that there are things that we have to unlearn, and these are patterns of thinking and patterns of behavior that have led us to more and more violence in our society. And so our corollary goal is to transform or seek changes in the mindsets, in the attitudes and values, and also in the behaviors that in the first place have either created or exacerbated violent conflicts. And this little graphic that you see below, to reach peace, teach peace, is the mantra of our center. But of course, it's not original to us. This was first promoted by the Global Campaign for Peace Education.
Loreta, do you have anything you'd like to add regarding curriculum outcomes in the Philippines?
So we say that
Loreta?
There's some technical issues, I guess. The
Loreta? Maybe she's not able to share with us. Sorry about that. Yeah, technical issues.
Yeah, I'm here. I have unmuted myself, but there's so much background noise. I don't know if you can hear it.
Yes.
We can hear you, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm listening.
One of the things we were asking was regarding the curriculum outcomes, if you had anything additional to add, Loreta?
Well, for now, those are the, as I've said, the overarching goals. And there is a book that maybe later on you might like to show. It's a book on peace education that contains a whole schema of objectives in terms of what is the knowledge base, what are the attitudes and values that we want to cultivate, and also some of the skills that we need to cultivate. And that is in one chapter of that book entitled Peace Education, A Pathway to a Culture of Peace. And I think much of the information about our the objectives could be found in that book. So maybe later you can mention it, or I don't know, maybe it's already in your list of resources.
Sure, we can go ahead and send the link directly to everyone that has registered for the webinar series. Thank you. So next I'd like to hand it over to Margaret Sinclair so she can share about programs intended for use at scale countrywide.
Okay, so this slide is about initiatives that can be done at scale and countrywide. And the next is about initiatives that are smaller scale and can't be done easily countrywide. So if you want to reach all the children in all the schools in the country, for example, then one possibility is to work with revising textbooks so that they will support inclusive, peaceful, empathetic, etc. Attitudes and behaviors and skills, and will perhaps give examples of how in that situation, that culture, these skills can manifest in social life and in the citizen's life. And in this series, this series, you'll find a case study in book 1 of an initiative in Nepal where the attempt was made to introduce peace, human rights, and civics into social studies textbooks all through primary and secondary school. And it was kind of a model project because different agencies worked together over 5 years or more to undertake this with proper capacity development for the writers. So it's actually the most interesting thing in booklet 1. Nevertheless, it's not easy, and it had a problem, which is that it was too ambitious, and it came up with like 100 activities for social studies classes, and so it was very difficult to work, and teacher training was difficult. You have to look at so many aspects in designing things, but in principle, working through textbook revision, even though it may be a modest vehicle for carrying these messages, it can reach widely. And then another example, which could be conceived at a national level, radio programming. And I just mentioned, for example, that in Sierra Leone, where they had used that rather locally, I think, during the Ebola epidemic, during the COVID, they decided to try and use radio to reach students across Sierra Leone. So these are the kind of things which can be done at scale, but very difficult. Next slide, please. Next slide, Jen. Thanks. So alternatively, it's possible to do rather special and effective programs at a smaller scale. So this is how I came into this field in working with refugee camps in Kenya, in the schools and in the community workshops, we were able to introduce peace education based on life skills very successfully for a number of years. It did require some budget, and we had the advantage that we had special peace education teacher added to the staff of the school, and we had an extra timetable period put on the school day, thanks to the schools being under the supervision of UNHCR. That's very difficult to replicate, but because of those circumstances, we were able to do a good job and had a good evaluation until the funding crisis with UNHCR. That program actually went to, in a different version, to the teacher training colleges in Sierra Leone through UNICEF. And there, a module called Emerging Issues was another name for this, was compulsory through 3 years of teacher training. So that was a good model. And obviously today we have Loreta with us, who has built teacher training in peace education into the work of her college in the Philippines. And as you all know better than me, in fact, many civil society organizations are doing peace education and similar programs. So these are examples that mention some of the things which can help when you're at small scale. You can have very good training and coaching of the teachers, and you may even be able to get extra time in the schedule. Okay, thanks, Jen. Next.
Thank you, Margaret. So as Margaret mentioned, Dr. Loreta Castro, one of the ways that they started to build capacity was through teacher training. And would you like to introduce this a little bit, Dr. Castro, and then I'll go ahead and play the clip?
Okay, so in 2010, our Center for Peace Education decided that it would be most strategic if we focus on teacher training institutions or colleges of education, because our center has a very lean staff and we could not serve individual institutions and the faculty of those individual institutions. We thought that this was the best way that we could use our time and our resources as a center. So that started the birth of this teacher training program for colleges of education. So we take teams of at least 2 people per college of education, and then about 15 teacher education institutions per training. So we have around between 30 to 35 participants in each of those trainings. So it was really a decision that we had to make because we had to be strategic in the use of our human power. And at the same time, in itself, it is strategic because these are faculty members who teach prospective teachers. And it would be great if part of the pre-service education of those prospective teachers could include themes and perspectives of peace education.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and play the slide then and learn more.
Jen, actually, we have something to do with this, because I remember there was one time I was in your conference and I was sharing with you how difficult it was because, because I was teaching, I was in the center, I was doing many things. And it came to a point when I felt there are hundreds of thousands of teachers. I cannot possibly reach them. So I remember you telling me, what about focusing on colleges of education? Or that was like an aha moment for me. I don't know if you remember that conversation. So when I returned, I told my colleague, there are only two of us in this center and we're both part-time. So why don't we do this? Let's focus on training teachers who are teaching in the colleges of education. Because then there is this multiplier effect because they're educating future teachers. And so we had two simple objectives: to capacitate them with the knowledge-based skills and value orientations of peace education, and then to encourage them to integrate this in the existing courses within the prescribed teacher education curriculum. So we encourage them, look at whatever you're teaching and see the entry points, look for the entry points. Now this photo is our latest group. This was in 2019, and we were supposed to have one March 2020, but it's postponed for a later time. But that one that we were supposed to have for 2020 is more for the Mindanao State University system because we think that's even an added layer of being strategic because we want the Mindanao State University system to be the catalyst for that group or for that region. Jen, actually, you have something to.
So the next that we'd like to focus on here is, Loreta, would you like to share anything in addition to what you shared on the video?
Well, none at the moment. Thank you.
So then one of the additional steps is developing a plan for curriculum enhancement. And so thinking about what you're already doing, where this might naturally fit, taking time to develop key competencies, as we spoke about earlier, reviewing textbooks and curriculum review. And so we'll have another session with textbooks and we'll work out the technology challenges for the future series, considering teacher training, which Loreta shared a little bit about and is an example, but we'll have more in detail. And then looking at developing those support materials that are needed. And really considering strong stakeholder engagement. So thinking about who we should bring to the table from the start is really key. And some of the tips from around the world are to consider the members of different ethnic, religious, and political groups, educational specialists from all of the political parties, departments, and agencies that work in and with education, and some of the key actors, such as teachers, administrators, school staff, and parents. And I'd like to also include thinking about students and the impact on students as we look at youth engagement. So Dr. Loreta Castro did an amazing work early on getting those key stakeholders together. So let's listen a little bit here to some of the good work that they did to get the support they needed to create 2 national policies.
Yeah, so I'll begin with the stakeholders within our school community, because this is one of the great lessons that I have learned over the years that even if you have a center, and of course we have a very small center, and it is staffed by 2 full-time people. Actually, we are 2 part-time and 1 full-time. And even if you have this, these people who are working for the center, it is definitely not enough. We really need what we call them associates, but once upon a time, these kindred spirits who joined us at the very beginning, which was way back in 1988. We were called the Peace Corps Group. But later, when we had the Center for Peace Education, they were called CPE Associates. And we started, and I want to say this because it might be helpful to others or thinking of how can we start. And I think a good start is really, first, as I've said, identifying your kindred spirits within the community. And secondly, to study together, or if you are all knowledgeable already, then plan together what you want to do. Yeah, so I'll begin with the stakeholders with
Through the key stakeholder engagement, Dr. Loreta Castro was able to work to help support with her colleagues several laws and policies. And Dr. Castro, would you like to share a little bit about this before we play it?
You're muted.
Dr. Castro, I think, yeah, you might be muted.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, I know you had asked me about what policy or legal frameworks are available to us here in the country. And the first thing that I mentioned was about the Executive Order 570, which was an executive order from then President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. But of course, that was not the sole work of our center. It was really the Peace Education Network, which we were leading at the time. And a member of our network was the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process, and Mr. Romy Halabaso of that agency, government agency, helped really in pushing this executive order. Order is entitled Institutionalizing Peace Education in Basic Education and Teacher Education. But as I have said in what I had written for that interview, the implementation was really uneven because of changes in the Department of Education and changes, of course, in the government administration. But I think a start has been made, and after that, there were also other policy frameworks that came, and I think I mentioned something about a department or a unit within the Department of Education now that is really working hard in putting in place peace education in conflict areas. That the idea is to really strengthen it, particularly in conflict areas in Mindanao. And then the other policy framework, actually a law, and this is about the Bangsamoro Organic Law. We tried to lobby for the inclusion of peace education in the Bangsamoro Organic Law. And fortunately, we had allies in the Bangsamoro Transition Commission that ensured that such a provision would really be in the law itself under education provisions. But of course, the Bangsamoro Organic Law was just completed about more than a year ago with the plebiscite in the affected areas. And now they are just, at this point when I checked with them, they said that what they have right now is really the draft of an education code that will operationalize what is in the law. So that education code in the Bangsamoro territory is to be, what do you call this, to be taken up by the Bangsamoro Parliament, and has to be approved by the Bangsamoro Parliament. And after that, hopefully, implementation will already ensue.
That's great.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Margaret, do you have any comments or thoughts?
No, I was just saying that's great.
Great. Thank you. So I think because we've had a little bit of a trouble with people being able to maybe hear the video, what we'll do is we'll re-record this session and post it on the GPPAC website without the background noise and challenges with some of the technology, so you'll be able to access that. And I think what we'll do is, if it's okay with Loreta and Margaret, we'll move on to some Q&A. Would that be okay?
Good idea.
Great. Let's do that.
Yeah, so
one of the things that we will include in the email too, aside from the link to the free Peace Education book that Dr. Loreta Castro has made available to everyone, are some of these resources from Dr. Margaret Sinclair. Margaret, would you like to share anything about these resources in particular before we move to Q&A?
Yes, just like to say that moving on from the work in the booklets, there's a group of us have formed together called NISSEM, Networking to Integrate Social and Emotional Learning, and the relevant Sustainable Development Goal target, which is target 4.7 about citizenship and so on, into textbooks and education materials. And last year we managed to put together a collection of 42 case studies and papers from people around the world, not so much academic, but for practitioners. And so that is referred to in these blogs, which summarize actually the core of this collection that we put out last year. And we're doing another collection this year. And I'm pleased to say that I think the editor, Mr. Andy Smart, is on this this session and may be addressing us later. So this looks like a lot, but it's 3 easy read blogs as compared to reading like a very long 700-page set of papers. So I do this brings us a little bit up to date from the UNESCO booklets. So I advise you to enjoy these.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and move into questions and discussion. In order for me, unfortunately, because I'm advancing the slides, to see the chat, every time I hit that, it moves the slides. So I'm going to go ahead and close the video, and we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. And that way I can see the chat there. So before we close there, Loreta, would you like to share anything regarding the topics covered so far?
well, I guess all that I want to say is to give an encouragement to all those who may not yet have started a peace education or peace studies program in their areas or schools or in their communities, in their organizations, that it's a challenge that is worth taking, because we could see, or we know what the benefits could be for those who are benefited by such programs. And by the way, I forgot to mention something. Maybe this is my opportunity. I forgot to mention that in the Commission on Higher Education, talking about policy frameworks, this is actually the most recent that was, that happened in the country, the Commission on Higher Education has come out with a memorandum in 2019 asking higher education institutions to integrate either peace education or peace studies as an elective or as a standalone subject. I think it's a very great development because, you know, we didn't have that at all in the past. So, but again, it is a policy framework. Much of the implementation will depend on the support of you know, other schools, those institutions that can commit to assist, because oftentimes government agencies have so many other concerns, and it is our, I guess, our responsibility, our challenge as civil society organizations and as you know, as people who are interested in promoting peace education to help out in promoting education for peace and nonviolence.
Thank you, Loreta. For Margaret, any follow-up there before we take questions?
Just to reinforce what Loreta said, that you can have all the policies and programs, but you need champions to make them actually work. And so, you know, it's exactly what she said, that everything can be there on paper but dead. But with the champions, if it's there, you can really do something with it. So I wanted to thank you all for being on this call and hope that you're champions, and we'll find some corner and way to follow up this line of work.
Great, thank you very much. So we can go ahead and take questions or comments. We know we have Andy Smart on, who Margaret had mentioned earlier. Andy, do you have some thoughts about what was shared so far?
Jen, sorry, were you asking me?
Andy Smart actually is on. Yes, Andy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't. I think I've said what
Sorry.
needed to be said. And maybe I just respond to questions if there are any.
Great, thank you. Andy, did you have something you'd like to share, or Margaret? Andy, to share?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, Loreta, and interesting to hear the range of work that you've done. I was interested to know more about the teacher education college and that work, which has been, I think it's 10 years since you started there, and what results you've seen, and how has it gone since you first started work with those teacher education courses?
Yes. The idea, Andy, is for those teachers who are teaching in the colleges of education to, the idea is for them to integrate what they have learned in the training workshop into their professional education courses. We have not been able to ask them, except for a few who did it because they have the opportunity, to offer standalone, a standalone subject, a 3-unit course that is just on peace education. And it is because the curriculum of the colleges of education are already very packed. And so what we really ask is to find entry points into the professional education courses that they are teaching, and to see where the themes of peace education can come in. or can be integrated. And when we did a small study some years back, we found out that those who have been trained have actually done it. They indicated what they integrated, in what subjects did they integrate those topics, and some even went beyond that expectation of integration. A few had done outreach to nearby schools because they just felt that they had to, that it was something that they could not keep for themselves, and they tried to share with other schools what they learned. So I think it has done fairly well. Well, Alma, I think I saw her come in, Alma Beroa. Sorry to put you in a spot. Are you still here, Alma?
It shows she's connecting.
Alma, if you're still in the group, would you like to unmute? And maybe you can share a bit, because you are the last group that we trained. And I think Alma can say more. She's the vice president of the Mindanao State University system. And they were the last group that went into training with us. So if she's around, I would have wanted her to say something about.
She's on, Loreta, but she was having trouble connecting, so you might have to ask her.
Okay, she has problem with her connectivity. And by the way, because she has connectivity problems, maybe I can just say that I'm very proud to have met Vice President Alma Beroa of the Mindanao State University system. It has 11 campuses, would you believe that? much larger than our college. But they, since a year or two ago, they have started to offer a standalone peace education subject for all undergraduate students. So if you're a student of Mindanao State University, one of those 11 campuses, you cannot graduate without going through that. That's the first, the first in the country. And I don't know of any other university that has done that. You know, it was really wonderful to know about it. And Vice President Alma, who's joining us from Marawi in Mindanao, has done that for her university. So, they have really gone beyond expectations.
Brilliant.
If anyone else has questions, you can either place them into the chat, or you could ask them directly now to either Dr. Margaret Sinclair or Dr. Loreta Castro. So while we're on here, what I will say is that apologies for all of the sound and technical issues. We will re-record this. We'll send an email out to everyone with the links to the resources and also the re-recording so you can hear everything clearly. Any questions either for Dr. Sinclair or Dr. Castro? You can either place them in the chat or ask them directly. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And for the next one, we'll be sure we have all of the kinks worked out. And we will send you the link. A big thank you to Dr. Loreta Castro for her 50 years of service in education, more than 50 years, and for all of her work in the Philippines, and to Dr. Margaret Sinclair for her work, her life's work as well in peace and conflict education, social emotional learning, and social cohesion. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of whatever's left of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.